This story contains themes of psychological suspense and existential dread, which some listeners may find unsettling. Imagine a place darker than any night you've ever known, colder than the deepest winter you've ever endured, under pressure so immense they would crush steel like paper. This is the abyssal plain, miles beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, a realm of perpetual night where life itself seems an impossibility. But even in this alien landscape, life thrives around hydrothermal vents, volcanic chimneys spewing superheated, mineral-rich water from the Earth's crust. For decades, scientists have studied these vents, marveling at the bizarre ecosystems they support, isolated from the sun's light. They thought they knew what to expect. They were wrong. The research vessel Triton, a marvel of modern oceanic engineering, was positioned over one of the deepest trenches off the coast of Oregon. Its mission to deploy advanced remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, to map and analyze a recently discovered field of these hydrothermal vents. The lead xenobotanist on board, Dr. Emily Carter, a woman whose calm demeanor belied a mind constantly buzzing with hypothesis and wonder, had spent her entire career chasing the fringes of life, looking for what shouldn't be possible. Her team, including the meticulous data analyst David Chun and the seasoned ROV pilot Michael Miller, shared her passion for the unknown. They were prepared for strange microorganisms, never-before-seen tube worms, and perhaps a new species of deep-sea fish. They were not prepared for what the vent did next. It began subtly, as all truly terrifying things often do. The Nautilus, their most advanced ROV, a hulking titanium beast bristling with sensors and cameras, was hovering near a particularly active vent field, nicknamed Tartarus by the crew for its infernal appearance. Michael, hunched over his controls, was guiding the Nautilus through a plume of superheated black smoke, its manipulators collecting samples. On the main screen, a thermal imaging overlay showed the vent's core glowing an angry orange, surrounded by the cooler blues of the abyssal water. Then David, monitoring the sonar and seismic readings, frowned. "Hold on," he muttered, adjusting his headset. "Did anyone else catch that?" Emily leaned closer to his console. "Catch what, David?" "A pulse. A very faint rhythmic pulse," he clarified, pointing to a barely perceptible blip on a complex waveform display. "Not seismic, not acoustic from the vent itself. It's a harmonic, like a faint low-frequency hum, but with a distinct pattern. 3 short, 1 long, then silence for a few seconds, then again." Michael scoffed, his fingers still dancing over the Nautilus controls. "Probably just some interference, David. Or the ROV's own internal systems echoing back. You know how these deep-sea environments mess with signals." Emily, however, was already intrigued. "Run a spectral analysis on it, David. Is it repeating?" As David worked, a tense silence fell over the control room, broken only by the hum of electronics and Michael's occasional commands to the Nautilus. Seconds stretched into a minute. Then David's eyes widened. "It's repeating, Dr. Carter." "Exactly. And it's not internal. I've cross-referenced it with the ROV's diagnostics. No match. It's external. And it's emanating from the vent." He pointed a trembling finger at the glowing orange core on the main screen. Michael frowned, dismissing his earlier skepticism. He guided the Nautilus slightly closer, its powerful lights illuminating the shimmering mineral deposits around the vent opening. Could it be some kind of unique geological resonance? The way the water flows through the rock causing a specific vibration? Possible, Emily conceded, though her gut told her otherwise. Geological phenomena were usually chaotic, unpredictable, or at best, cyclically repetitive in a simple mechanical way. This 3 short, 1 long pattern felt different. It felt deliberate. They spent the next few hours trying to debunk it. They moved the Nautilus away, and the signal faded. They brought it back, and the signal intensified, resuming its precise, rhythmic pulse. They tried sending out their own pings, standard sonar bursts to map the area. And that's when the truly unsettling began. After a particularly strong sonar ping from the Nautilus, the vent's pattern changed. Instead of the 3 short, 1 long, it now emitted a series of rapid staccato pulses. A flurry of them, almost like an agitated response. Then it settled into a new pattern. 2 long, 2 short. It was undeniably different from its previous rhythm. Michael let out a low whistle. "Okay, that's weird. It's like it's reacting to us. To our sonar." Emily felt a prickle of ice spread through her veins. "Not just reacting, Michael. she corrected, her voice barely a whisper. It responded. It changed its pattern after our input. That implies a degree of awareness. David was furiously typing, overlaying the new pattern with the old. The complexity has increased. The frequency modulation, the amplitude, it's not random. It's almost as if it's trying to mimic or acknowledge our presence. The control room became eerily quiet. The initial scientific curiosity had curdled into something far more profound, far more unsettling. The idea of a geological formation exhibiting such a sophisticated, adaptive response was simply unimaginable. Rocks didn't observe. Vents didn't communicate. Not like this. What are we looking at, Emily? Michael asked, his voice now devoid of any trace of his earlier jovial skepticism. His eyes were fixed on the main screen, where the Nautilus hovered precariously close to the pulsating vent. Emily stared at the thermal image, at the glowing orange mauve Tartarus. The vent didn't just spew chemicals. It was sending out a message that seemed to change based on their own actions. And the implications of that were staggering. If this was not a natural phenomenon, then what was it? An undiscovered life form? Something entirely alien? Something that had been slumbering for eons? Stirred awake by the intrusion of humanity's technology? A shiver ran down her spine, despite the controlled temperature of the lab. This wasn't just a new discovery. This was a profound, terrifying question mark placed squarely over everything they thought they knew about life, about the Earth, about the universe itself. The deep-sea vent wasn't just a geological feature. It was alive, and it had just introduced itself. The question now was, what did it want to say next? And were they truly ready to listen? The control room aboard the research vessel Triton plunged into a silence so profound it felt heavier than the crushing pressure of the deep ocean outside. It wasn't the calm silence of contemplation, but the stunned, breathless quiet of minds grappling with the utterly impossible. Dr. Michael Reed, the veteran oceanographer, felt a cold dread creep up his spine, not from the temperature of the air-conditioned lab, but from the sheer mind-bending implications of what they had just witnessed. Emily Carter, usually the most composed of the team, was the first to break the spell, her voice a barely audible whisper. Did anyone else see that? Dr. Jessica Chun, the geologist, gripped the armrests of her chair, her knuckles white. See it? Emily, I think we all just saw the laws of physics take a vacation. Her eyes darted to Michael, seeking an explanation, a rational anchor in the storm of the surreal. David Miller, the submersible pilot, just shook his head slowly, his gaze fixed on the main screen, where the vent now appeared as it always had, a churning primeval maw of superheated water and minerals. The intricate, impossible geometry was gone, vanished as if it had never been. My systems show no anomalies, no visual glitches, no interference. The feed was crystal clear. Michael finally found his voice, a strained rasp. Replay it, Emily. Every single frame. Analyze the spectral data, the thermal output, everything. I want every sensor log from that exact moment. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his mind racing. Was it an optical illusion? A unique, fleeting geological phenomenon? A new form of extremophile life so advanced it could manipulate its environment in ways they couldn't comprehend? Or something far, far stranger? Emily's fingers flew across her console. The recording rewound, paused, then played again in excruciating slow motion. The shimmering iridescent patterns pulsed into existence, formed the impossibly complex geometric structure, held it for a beat, and then dissolved, leaving only the familiar chaos of the vent. Then, Emily isolated the audio feed from the submersible's hydrophones. The echo played again, a sequence of precisely modulated frequencies, not random noise but a structured, almost melodic sequence of clicks and hums. It was too intricate, too specific, to be merely the sound of water turbulence or rock shifting. That's not natural, Jessica murmured, her scientific training fighting a losing battle with the evidence. That's information. It's encoded. Encoded by what? David asked, his voice laced with a tremor of fear. A rock? A plume of chemicals? Michael closed his eyes, then opened them, forcing himself to confront the undeniable. No, not by a rock. Not by chemicals. That pattern, the sound, it was a response. A direct, unambiguous response to our presence. To us. He looked at each of his team members, seeing their fear, their awe, their dawning comprehension mirrored in their faces. The vent didn't just show us something, it communicated. The implications were staggering. If this was communication, what was the message? And what did it mean for everything they thought they knew about life, about intelligence, about the very fabric of existence on their own planet? The deep sea, the last frontier, had just revealed itself to be something infinitely more profound and terrifying than they had ever imagined. Michael knew they couldn't simply pack up and leave. The scientific imperative, the sheer magnitude of the discovery, demanded further exploration, no matter how unsettling. David, prepare for another descent. We're going back down. David hesitated, a rare moment of uncertainty for the usually unflappable pilot. Dr. Reed, with all due respect, are you sure? We don't know what that thing is. We don't know what it's capable of. Precisely why we have to go back, Michael countered, his voice firm, though his heart hammered against his ribs. We go with extreme caution. Passive observation only. No direct engagement unless absolutely necessary. Jessica, I want you monitoring every geological and chemical signature. Emily, every single sensor output, every frequency, every light fluctuation. David, maintain maximum distance while allowing for optimal sensor range. If anything feels off, you pull back immediately. Understood. A chorus of reluctant but determined understoods filled the room. The fear was palpable, but so was the insatiable hunger for knowledge that drove them all. This wasn't just a scientific mission anymore. It was a journey into the unknown depths of consciousness itself. Hours later, the submersible Nautilus II, a marvel of deep-sea engineering, was once again descending into the abyssal plain. The journey was tense, each click and hum of the subsystems amplified by the team's heightened anxiety. The deep-sea lights pierced the eternal darkness, revealing the ghostly terrain of the ocean floor, a landscape of alien beauty and crushing pressure. As they approached the vent field, the air in the control room grew thick with anticipation. Emily reported initial sensor readings. Thermal fluctuations are unusual, Dr. Reed. Not chaotic like typical vent activity, more like pulse patterns. And the chemical composition of the water column around the vent is showing trace elements not typically associated with this geological signature. Jessica frowned at her own monitor. She's right. It's like the vent is actively modifying its output, and the seismic readings are flatlining. No microtremors, nothing. It's eerily quiet, geologically speaking. David guided the Nautilus II into position, maintaining a respectful distance, its powerful lights illuminating the massive black smoker chimney. It looked the same, yet profoundly different, imbued with a new, unsettling significance. Then it happened again. Not the complex geometric pattern this time. Instead, from the very core of the vent, where the superheated water spewed forth, a series of light pulses began to emanate. They were subtle at first, barely perceptible shifts in the vent's inherent glow, but then they intensified, becoming distinctly visible. Not a steady light, but a rapid rhythmic flickering, a language of light in the crushing dark. It's doing it again, Emily exclaimed, her voice a mix of terror and exhilaration. Light pulses, varying frequencies, varying intensities. It's synchronized with the audio signature we heard earlier. On the main screen, the Nautilus II's cameras captured the surreal display. The vent, a geological anomaly, was now a beacon. Flashing in the darkness, a silent, urgent communication. Michael leaned in, his face inches from the screen. Emily, can you isolate a pattern? Is there any discernible sequence? Her fingers flew across the keyboard, her eyes wide with concentration, scrolling through data streams, filtering out noise. Yes, there is. It's not random. It's like a complex binary code, but with multiple layers. Each flash, each intensity, each duration. It's a distinct unit of information. The light pulses continued, a relentless, mesmerizing cascade. It was an undeniable, deliberate form of communication. This wasn't merely a response. It was an initiation. The vent, this deep-sea enigma, wasn't just acknowledging their presence. It was actively reaching out. I'm cross-referencing with universal mathematical constants, prime number sequences, even basic organic chemistry structures. Emily rattled off, her voice rising in pitch with each new discovery. There's a repeating motif, a foundational element. It's almost like a greeting, or an identifier. Jessica, who had been struggling to reconcile the geological impossible with the biological impossible, finally surrendered to the incomprehensible. It's not just alive, Michael. It's intelligent, and it's trying to tell us something." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. This wasn't a discovery of a new species of bacteria or a unique mineral. This was first contact. In the deepest, darkest trenches of their own planet, they had stumbled upon an intelligence that defied all known parameters of life. Emily suddenly gasped, her eyes fixed on her monitor, her breath catching in her throat. I think I've got something. A repeating sequence. A core concept. It's not a word, not in any language we know, but it's fundamental. A foundational piece of information. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the deep-sea water. What is it, Emily? What is it saying? Her voice was barely a whisper, filled with a profound, almost reverent awe and a creeping terror. It's a representation of itself, not a name but a descriptor, a state of being, and the closest human concept I can apply to it. It's observer. Observer. The deep-sea vent, this geological marvel, this living intelligence had just introduced itself, not as a name but as a role. It wasn't just a part of the Earth. It was an active participant, a silent witness to millennia of planetary evolution. It had been watching, and now it was speaking. The light pulses intensified, faster, more complex, as if the observer was eager to share more, to reveal deeper truths. The team stood on the precipice of an understanding that could redefine humanity's place in the cosmos. But the question remained. What exactly had this ancient, silent observer been watching? And what devastating secrets was it now ready to unveil? The questions hung heavy in the frigid, pressurized air of the Odysseus control room, vibrating with an intensity that dwarfed the hum of the ship's engines. Dr. Eris Thorne, his face a mask of awe and apprehension, stared at the monitor, replaying the last moments of the ROV's encounter. The vent hadn't merely pulsed, it had responded. A deliberate, intelligent surge of energy that defied every known law of geology and physics. Beside him, Dr. Lena Hansen, usually a beacon of calm scientific inquiry, was visibly trembling, her gaze fixed on the same spectral data. Dr. Ben Carter, the data specialist, was already a blur of motion at his console, fingers flying across keyboards, trying to isolate and analyze the anomalous signature. It's not just a signal, Eris, Ben finally muttered, his voice strained with disbelief. It's complex, layered, like 1,000 different frequencies interwoven, each carrying discrete packets of information. Our systems are barely keeping up. Eris leaned closer, his heart hammering against his ribs. Can you isolate any patterns, Ben? Anything at all? Lena chimed in, her voice hushed. Look at the energy signature, Ben. The way it modulates. It's almost organic, like a neural network firing, but on an incomprehensibly vast scale. Her background in astrobiology made her uniquely sensitive to the subtle echoes of life, even in the most alien contexts. Yet, this was beyond anything she had ever conceived. This wasn't life as they knew it. It was something else entirely, something that had perhaps observed life for eons. As Ben struggled, the deep-sea vent, miles below them, began to emit a steady, rhythmic thrum. It wasn't violent, but persistent, a low-frequency pulse that resonated through the ocean depths and vibrated subtly through the Odysseus hull. On their monitors, the spectral data from the observer transformed. What was once a chaotic burst now resolved into a continuous, structured stream. It was like a torrent of digital information, flowing relentlessly from the abyss. It's a data stream, Ben gasped, his eyes wide. A continuous broadcast. It's not stopping. And the bandwidth? It's astronomical. We're talking about petabytes of information per second, Eris. Our servers can't handle this indefinitely. Eris knew the implications. They were receiving data at a rate that would take them decades, perhaps centuries, to fully process with their current technology, even if they could capture it all. But the sheer act of transmission was the revelation. This ancient, silent entity was now actively communicating. Prioritize, Eris commanded, his mind racing. Capture everything you can, Ben. But focus on isolating any repeating sequences, any structural patterns, anything that resembles a language or a code. Lena, try to find any biological, evolutionary, or even geological markers within the chaos. For the next several hours, the control room descended into a frenetic, almost meditative silence, broken only by the rapid clicks of keyboards and the low hum of the ship's systems. Coffee cups piled up, and the air grew thick with anticipation and the scent of ozone. The three scientists, united by a common, profound revelation, worked as one, each grappling with a piece of the incomprehensible puzzle. Then a breakthrough. Ben, his face pale with exhaustion and exhilaration, managed to filter out a recurring, highly complex mathematical sequence. It wasn't encryption, it was foundational. It was the very syntax of the data itself. Using cutting-edge algorithms, he began to peel back the first layer. "I've got something," he announced, his voice barely a whisper. "It's not a language in the linguistic sense. It's abstract, more like a series of nested conceptual frameworks, like a universal grammar of existence." On the main display, fragmented images began to coalesce, projected from the decoded data. They weren't photographs or videos. They were intricate, three-dimensional geometric constructs that shifted and flowed, seemingly representing vast cosmic phenomena. Nebulae blooming like celestial flowers, galaxies spiraling in slow, majestic dances, the birth and death of stars. But these weren't just pretty pictures. They were accompanied by incredibly precise numerical data, showing gravitational forces, stellar compositions, and the precise timings of events, all from an impossibly detached, omniscient perspective. "It's a record," Lena breathed, her eyes fixed on the screen. "A cosmic chronicle. It's observing the universe." Eris felt a chill that had nothing to do with the deep ocean. But why here? Why focused on Earth? As if in response to his unspoken question, the geometric constructs began to zoom in, the scale shifting from galactic to planetary. Suddenly, Earth filled the display. But it wasn't the Earth they knew. They saw its molten birth, its primordial oceans forming, the first single-celled organisms emerging, evolving, diversifying. It was a hyper-accelerated, incredibly detailed history of their own planet, meticulously recorded from its very inception. "It's like watching a time-lapse of 4 billion years," Ben murmured, mesmerized. "Every major geological shift, every mass extinction, the rise and fall of countless species. It's all here in exquisite detail." Yet, as the timeline progressed, Lena noticed something profoundly disturbing. "Wait," she said, her voice sharp. "There's an anomaly, a recurring pattern that doesn't fit the natural progression." She pointed to a subtle, almost imperceptible flicker within the vast data stream, an aberrant ripple in the otherwise perfect historical record of Earth. It appeared intermittently, starting long before multicellular life, persisting through geological epochs, and intensifying during crucial evolutionary junctures. It was like a persistent glitch in the observer's otherwise flawless chronicle. "It's not a natural phenomenon," Lena insisted, her brow furrowed. "It's too structured, too deliberate. It's like an external influence, or a persistent artificial presence." Eris felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. An artificial presence, embedded in Earth's history spanning billions of years? What could that even mean? The data stream continued its relentless flow, now focusing with unnerving precision on the development of complex life, then on the emergence of early hominids, and finally, on the rapid ascent of human civilization. The observer wasn't just recording, it was watching. Its focus wasn't just on cosmic events or geological shifts, but on the thresholds of sentience, the moments when self-awareness sparked, when tools were first fashioned, when language began to form. It was a record of their journey from an ancient alien vantage point. The sheer weight of this revelation was staggering. Humanity wasn't alone, not in the sense of other life in the cosmos, but in the sense that they had been under constant, meticulous, and utterly silent observation for the entire duration of their existence. The deep-sea vent wasn't just a geological curiosity. It was an ancient, alien eye. Suddenly, the continuous data stream from the vent shifted. The rhythmic thrum intensified, becoming more urgent, more demanding. On the main display, the sweeping cosmic and terrestrial history abruptly ceased. The focus narrowed, not on a past event but on something immediate, something present. The geometric constructs from the data stream reformed, becoming sharper, more defined. They coalesced into a complex, three-dimensional representation that sent a jolt of pure terror through Eris. It was a detailed holographic projection of their own ROV, the very remotely operated vehicle currently tethered miles beneath them, exploring the vent. But then the image flickered, layered with something else. Beneath the ROV's modern contours, they saw the ghostly outline of another structure, strikingly similar in function, yet clearly ancient, eroded, and encrusted with eons of deep-sea sediment. And then the most horrifying detail emerged. The ancient structure, eerily resembling their ROV, was depicted not just observing the vent, but interacting with it, thousands, perhaps millions of years ago. The observer wasn't just watching Earth, it was watching them, and it had been watched before. The secrets it was unveiling weren't just of the cosmos, or of Earth's forgotten past. They were secrets that directly implicated humanity, and perhaps something else entirely. The realization hung heavy in the air, a chilling scientific truth that defied comfort. This wasn't merely a geological marvel or an astronomical anomaly. It was an intelligence ancient beyond human comprehension, observing, analyzing, and now perhaps judging. The initial wonder that had driven Dr. Eris Thorne and his team had slowly curdled into a profound apprehension. Every new data point, every subtle shift in the vent's emissions, seemed to whisper of a presence that transcended the natural order of the world they knew. Dr. Emily Carter, with her sharp intellect and an uncanny ability to spot patterns in chaos, was the first to articulate the shift. She had been poring over the latest spectroscopic readings, cross-referencing them with historical seismic data, and even global atmospheric composition records. Her brow was perpetually furrowed, a silent testament to the colossal puzzle she was trying to solve. One evening, as the submersible Nautilus prepared for another descent, pushing deeper into the unknown, Emily called Eris over to her console. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, despite the hum of the ship's engines around them. "Eris," she began, her finger tracing a particularly jagged line on a holographic display. "Look at this. It's not just patterns anymore. It's responsive feedback loops. But not like anything we've ever modeled for natural phenomena." She zoomed in, highlighting a segment of data that pulsed with a rhythmic, almost deliberate regularity. "At first I thought it was just noise or a complex harmonic, but I ran it through every known algorithm for biological, geological, and even astrophysical signals. Nothing matches. Except..." She paused, her eyes wide, meeting Eris's gaze. "Except when I started feeding it our data. Human data." Eris leaned closer, his own heart beginning a slow, heavy beat. "What kind of human data, Emily?" "Everything," she replied, her voice gaining a desperate edge. "Global internet traffic patterns, energy consumption spikes, population growth curves, even aggregated emotional sentiment data from major global events. When I overlay those with the vent's output, especially after our last few interactions, it's like it's incorporating them, not just reflecting but processing them. It's analyzing humanity, Eris. It's tracking our trajectory." The implications were staggering. The vent wasn't just a passive observer of cosmic events or Earth's deep history. It was actively monitoring human civilization, evaluating its progress, its impact. It was a cosmic auditor, and they had just, by their very presence, made its audit more immediate, more direct. Then, Emily showed him the truly unsettling part. Interspersed within these complex, human data mirroring patterns were sequences that defied all categorization. They weren't biological, not terrestrial, not even theoretical physics as they understood it. They were like fragments of an entirely different language, a code so alien it made the very concept of human communication seem rudimentary. "This is the something else entirely part," Emily said, her voice barely audible. "These fragments, they appear to be older, embedded deeper, as if this entire system, this vent, this entity, whatever it is, was built on top of or designed to interact with something even more ancient. Something that also watched long before humans ever looked up at the stars or down into the abyss." The Nautilus prepared for its next descent. Michael, the lead pilot, and Jessica, his co-pilot, were both seasoned professionals, but even they had begun to feel the shift in the atmosphere aboard the research vessel. The scientific fervor had been replaced by a quiet, almost reverent dread. Each time they lowered into the inky blackness, the ocean felt less like a frontier and more like a threshold. As they approached the vent, the instruments on the submersible began to hum with an uncharacteristic intensity. The energy readings spiked, not just from the vent itself, but from the surrounding water, as if the very ocean floor was becoming electrically charged. From the surface, Eris and Emily watched their telemetry with bated breath. "It's different this time," Michael's voice crackled over the comms, a tremor barely suppressed. "The light, it's not just pulsing. It's responding to our movements. When I adjust the thrusters, it shifts. When Jessica moves the manipulator arm, there's a flicker." Jessica confirmed, her voice tight. "It's like it's anticipating us, or reacting directly to our intent." It's almost playful but in a terrifying way. Emily, back on the surface, quickly cross-referenced Michael's movements with the vent's light patterns. He's right, Eris. The correlation is almost one-to-one. It's not random. It's an interaction. Eris knew this was their chance to push the boundary, to truly understand the nature of this interaction. "Michael, Jessica," he commanded, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Initiate the controlled stimulus protocol. Send a simple, repeating sine wave at frequency gamma 7. Let's see if it just reflects, or if it truly responds." Michael, with a deep breath, activated the acoustic emitter. A pure, unwavering tone, a single mathematical frequency, pierced the silent depths. On the screens above, the vent's light intensified dramatically, swirling into complex geometric patterns that had never been observed before. It was no longer just a pulse. It was a dance, an intricate ballet of light and shadow. Then something truly extraordinary happened. The vent's light didn't just reflect the sine wave. It absorbed it. The pure tone from the Nautilus vanished from their sonar, swallowed whole. And in its place, the vent began to emit its own sound. It wasn't a sine wave. It was a symphony. A cacophony of frequencies, harmonies, and dissonances erupted from the vent, flooding the Nautilus as hydrophones. It was a sound that defied description. Ancient, mechanical, biological, spiritual, all at once. It was a language, but not one of words or even simple mathematical sequences. It was a language of pure information, dense with meaning, yet utterly incomprehensible. And within this sonic tapestry, Eris and Emily, listening intently on the surface, detected echoes of the strange, alien fragments Emily had discovered earlier. The something else entirely code. It was as if the vent was speaking in multiple tongues, layering its response. "It's talking back," Jessica breathed, her face pale in the submersible's dim light. "It's not just reacting. It's replying." The reply wasn't just auditory. The light patterns from the vent began to morph, projecting holographic-like images into the water around the Nautilus. They weren't clear, defined pictures, but swirling ephemeral forms that seemed to shift and coalesce, hinting at structures, landscapes, and entities that were utterly alien. Some forms seemed to stretch, ripple, and then vanish, only to be replaced by others that mimicked the intricate, fractal geometry of the vent itself. It was a visual language as complex and overwhelming as the auditory one. Michael gripped the controls, his knuckles white. "It's showing us something. But what is it?" Back on the surface, Emily frantically tried to record and analyze the incoming data stream. Her supercomputers were struggling, overwhelmed by the sheer volume and complexity of the information. "It's not just showing us something, Michael," she yelled into the comms, her voice strained. "It's trying to communicate with us. It's layering its response, combining our input with its own vast knowledge base. It's like it's trying to bridge a gap of billions of years, but the sheer density of the information, it's crushing our systems." Eris felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. They had poked the bear. They had knocked on a door that had been shut for eons, and now, something on the other side was answering with a force they were utterly unprepared for. The vent wasn't just a scientific curiosity anymore. It was an active participant, and its interaction was not merely observation, but a full-blown dialogue with an entity that dwarfed humanity's entire existence. The secrets weren't just being unveiled. They were being thrust upon them, demanding understanding, demanding a response in turn. And the chilling possibility began to form in Eris's mind. What if they had not just awakened it, but activated it? What if their curiosity had just initiated something irreversible, not just for them but for the entire planet? The silence that followed the vent's overwhelming response felt heavier than any pressure the ocean could exert. They were no longer just observers of Earth's ancient secrets. They were now inextricably entangled in them. The air on the bridge of the Nautilus crackled with a silence far more profound than the crushing depths outside. It wasn't merely the absence of sound. It was the suffocating weight of an impossible truth. Screens that had moments ago displayed a flurry of data now seemed frozen, reflecting the stunned faces of the crew. Dr. Eris Thorne, usually a whirlwind of scientific curiosity, stood rigid, his gaze fixed on the main display where the vent's impossible energy signature had just pulsed, an echo of a global shudder. Dr. Lena Hansen, her hands still hovering over a geological console, looked as if the very bedrock of her understanding had crumbled beneath her feet. Ben Carter, the ship's usually unflappable communications and systems expert, was hunched over his station, fingers flying across keyboards with a desperate, frantic energy, his face illuminated by the data stream scrolling at warp speed. Captain Eva Rostova, though outwardly composed, gripped the edge of her command chair so tightly her knuckles were stark white. "Ben," Captain Rostova's voice was a low, strained whisper, cutting through the heavy quiet. "Report. What just happened?" Ben didn't look up, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Captain, it's unprecedented. The energy spike wasn't localized. My sensors, they're showing a global geomagnetic perturbation. A massive synchronous surge across every major grid on the planet. For a split second, the Earth's magnetic field, it flexed." Lena gasped, a small choke sound. "What about the seismic readings?" Anything. Ben scoffed, a humorless bark. "Lena, the entire planetary crust just vibrated like a tuning fork. Microseismic events are spiking globally, not just along tectonic plates, but in stable continental shields. We're talking about a resonance, a harmonic frequency that just rippled through the entire lithosphere. It's like the planet itself just let out a scream." Eris finally moved, stepping closer to Ben's console, his voice barely audible. "And the biological impact? What are the distant hydrophones picking up?" Ben pulled up another screen, his voice grim. "Anomalous bioluminescence events reported from multiple deep-sea observatories thousands of miles away. Strange, synchronous migrations of specific marine species in patterns never observed before. There's even a preliminary report from a satellite array indicating a measurable, albeit temporary, alteration in atmospheric ionization levels above the Pacific. It's like the Nautilus just coughed, and the planet caught pneumonia." The implications were staggering. This wasn't just a scientific discovery. It was an act of planetary-scale communication, or perhaps a demonstration of power. The vent hadn't merely responded to their probe. It had broadcast its presence to the entire world, leveraging the Earth itself as its medium. The magnitude of their actions, the sheer, unimaginable consequence of their curiosity, now settled upon them with the crushing weight of 1,000 atmospheres. Captain Rostova slowly straightened, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her crew. The weight of command, of being the sole witness to such an event, was almost visible on her shoulders. Are we certain this is directly linked to our probe? To our attempt at communication?" Eris nodded, his voice hollow. "The synchronicity, Captain. The timing of the global events perfectly aligns with the vent's energy pulse. It's too precise, too specific to be a coincidence. We woke something up, and it responded by shaking the very foundations of the world." He ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting between the screens displaying the chaotic global data and the still glowing, albeit now subdued, signature of the vent. "But why? Why such an extreme response? What did we say, or rather, what did it hear that warranted such a declaration?" Lena, ever the pragmatist, pushed past her initial shock. "If it's a declaration, what does it mean? Is it hostile? Is it a warning? Or is it an invitation?" Her voice trailed off, the last word hanging in the air, chilling them all. The idea of an invitation from something so ancient, so powerful, and so fundamentally alien was terrifying. Ben, still monitoring a feed, suddenly stiffened. "Captain, I'm getting an encrypted burst from Surface Command. Priority Alpha 1. It's Admiral Peterson." A collective tension gripped the bridge. Admiral Peterson was higher than their direct contact, a figure of immense authority. This wasn't routine. This was a direct consequence of the global events. The world, or at least the most powerful figures in it, was already asking questions. "Put him through Ben's secure channel," Captain Rostova ordered, her voice regaining a semblance of its usual steel. She knew this moment was coming, but the speed of it was unnerving. A moment later, Admiral Peterson's stern, unsmiling face appeared on a smaller screen, his background a stark, windowless office. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, held a hint of bewilderment and deep concern. "Captain Rostova, I trust you are well. I'm calling regarding the anomalies." "Admiral," Rostova replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the chaos within. "We are well. And yes, we are actively investigating the current planetary phenomena." She chose her words carefully, a practiced dance of obfuscation. Peterson's gaze narrowed. "Captain, don't play coy. My sensors, and those of every major power on Earth, just registered a global energy spike that nearly fried sensitive equipment in geosynchronous orbit. We had momentary power fluctuations across entire continents. Seismic events are being reported in regions that haven't seen activity in centuries. And I'm getting reports of strange atmospheric disturbances. My intelligence suggests this originated in your operating area. What precisely is happening down there? The pressure was immense. Rostova glanced at her crew, a silent acknowledgement of the impossible situation. How much could she reveal? How much should she reveal? The implications of exposing the vent's intelligence, its global reach, to the world's militaries and governments were terrifying. It could spark a global panic or worse, a desperate, dangerous scramble to control this new unknown power. Admiral, Rostova began, choosing her words with extreme caution, we've observed an unprecedented geological event, a highly energetic hydrothermal eruption, unlike anything documented before. We believe it may have contributed to the geomagnetic fluctuations, though the scale of the global impact is perplexing. Peterson's eyes bored into her. Perplexing, Captain? Or utterly unprecedented and potentially catastrophic? I'm receiving directives from the highest levels of government. They want answers. They want to know if this is a natural phenomenon or something else. And they specifically want to know if your expedition is in any way responsible. The accusation hung heavy in the air. Eris and Lena exchanged a look of profound unease. Ben's fingers twitched over his console, ready to cut the feed if needed. Admiral, our mission is purely scientific, Rostova stated firmly. We are observing, not manipulating. We are as surprised by these events as anyone. It was a half-truth, but one she desperately needed to maintain. Peterson held her gaze for a long moment, clearly unconvinced but perhaps without immediate recourse. Captain, I need a full, detailed report within the next 6 hours. Every piece of data, every observation. And I mean everything. Until then, consider yourselves under strict radio silence for all non-essential communications. Your mission profile has just changed dramatically. You are now a primary monitoring station for a global crisis. Do not engage with anything that could escalate the situation further. Understood. Understood, Admiral, Rostova replied, her voice clipped. The screen went dark, leaving them once again in the heavy silence. But this time, it was laced with the chilling reality of external scrutiny. The world was watching, or rather, the world was feeling the vent's presence, and now it was looking for a scapegoat, for an explanation. He knows, Ben said quietly, stating the obvious. He doesn't know what, but he knows it came from us. And he wants us to stop escalating the situation, Eris added, a sardonic edge to his voice. As if we have any control over what that thing does. Lena walked to the main display, staring at the vent's still glowing signature. What do we do, Captain? We just triggered a global event. We've been ordered to stand down. But what if it expects us to respond? That was the terrifying question. The vent had communicated. It had used the Earth itself as its voice. Was its silence now a sign of waiting? Of expectation? The pressure to respond, to engage with this ancient unknown intelligence, warred with a stark warning from the surface. To ignore it felt like turning their back on a sentient planet, but to engage further, that could unleash something far worse than a temporary power fluctuation. They were trapped between the crushing depths and the watchful eyes of the surface, between the unknown, immense power of the vent and the desperate, fearful power of humanity. The vent had responded. Now the ultimate test was whether they dared to respond back. The global tremors might have subsided, but the tremors of fear and profound uncertainty within the Nautilus crew had just begun. The bridge of the Nautilus was a tomb of hushed terror. The flickering blue light of the consoles cast long, dancing shadows, making every face a mask of apprehension. No one spoke, yet the air vibrated with unspoken questions, with the frantic thrum of adrenaline. Captain Eva Rostova, her spine ramrod straight, was the first to break the suffocating silence. Her voice, though calm, was edged with a tremor that betrayed the iron control she exerted. Report, Dr. Thorne. What exactly did we just witness? Dr. Eris Thorne, usually radiating an almost boyish enthusiasm for discovery, looked utterly drained. His eyes, usually alight with intellectual fire, were wide with a primal fear he struggled to conceal. He gestured weakly towards the main display, where the seismic data from the vent's response was still scrolling, a chaotic symphony of energy spikes. Captain, it was It was beyond anything we could have predicted. Our initial pulse, a carefully calibrated 7.2 on the Richter scale, was transmitted. Approximately 30 seconds later, the vent responded. Not with a simple echo, not with a collapse, but with a mirror image of our own signature. But amplified, distorted, and seemingly directed. Dr. Jessica Chun, her face pale, leaned closer to her console. The energy output, it was immense, easily equivalent to a magnitude 9.0 earthquake, localized directly at the vent. Yet, the global tremors, as you know, were significantly less. It was as if the vent contained the bulk of that power, releasing just enough to make its point felt across the planet, but not to utterly devastate it. Make its point. Captain Rostova's voice was sharp. Are you suggesting this was a deliberate act? An entity making a statement? Thorn slowly turned to face her, his gaze unwavering despite the fear in his eyes. Captain, I don't know what else to call it. The precision, the timing, the replication of our own signal, it points to something far beyond simple geological activity. It wasn't a random eruption. It was a communication. A nervous murmur rippled through the bridge. David Miller, the chief engineer, spoke up, his voice hoarse. A communication? From what? A rock? A superorganism? Dr. Thorne, we're talking about something utterly unprecedented. Something that just shook the planet in response to our actions. Precisely, Thorne countered, his scientific fervor beginning to reassert itself, battling against the cold dread. And that's why we cannot afford to simply retreat. We've established contact. We've provoked a reaction. To walk away now would be to abandon the greatest discovery in human history, and potentially, to leave a sleeping giant undisturbed, but also misunderstood. Captain Rostova moved from the command chair, walking to stand directly in front of the main display, her back to the crew. She stared at the undulating lines of seismic energy, her mind racing through protocols, through worst-case scenarios, through her responsibility to her crew and to humanity. Undermine Dr. Thorne or provoke further. We sent a seismic pulse, an act of probing, and it responded with a force that could level continents if it chose to. What if our next communication is interpreted as an act of aggression? What if it decides to not contain its power next time? And what if it interprets our silence as fear, as weakness? Thorne pressed. Consider the implications, Captain. This isn't just about a scientific curiosity. This is about understanding a new form of life or intelligence, or geological phenomenon that exists at the very core of our planet. One that clearly possesses capabilities we cannot fathom. We must try to understand it. Dr. Emily Davis, the oceanographer, chimed in, her voice trembling slightly. Captain Eris is right. The patterns in the vent's response, they weren't purely chaotic. Jessica and I have been running preliminary spectral analysis. There are harmonics, repetitive frequencies embedded within the primary seismic signature. It's almost like a complex language, not just brute force. Language. Michael Evans, the communications officer, adjusted his headset, his brow furrowed. Are you saying it sent us a message? Like words? Not words as we understand them, Michael, Jessica clarified, but structured energy patterns. Think of it like a complex musical chord, or a mathematical equation expressed through seismic waves. It's too intricate to be random, too specific to be purely geological. It's almost as if it took our simple note and played back an entire symphony. Captain Rostova turned, her gaze sweeping over her anxious crew. A symphony that caused global tremors. A symphony that demonstrated a power beyond our comprehension. My primary directive is the safety of this crew and, by extension, the prevention of an existential threat to the world above. We have no idea what we are dealing with. For all we know, this response was a warning. A leave us alone in seismic code. Or a hello, Thorne countered, his voice gaining strength. A we hear you. Captain, this is the ultimate frontier. The equivalent of receiving a radio signal from an alien civilization, but one that lives inside our own planet. We cannot shy away from this. Humanity has to know. The debate raged for hours, a tense, emotionally charged back and forth that echoed the tremors that had just shaken the world. Captain Rostova was torn. Her naval training screamed caution, retreat, analysis from a safe distance. Her sense of duty to protect her crew was paramount. Yet, the sheer magnitude of Thorne's claims, supported by the growing evidence from Jessica and Emily, gnawed at her. The idea of an intelligent, powerful entity residing within the Earth, one they had just poked, was terrifying, but also undeniably compelling. To simply turn around and leave to bury this secret felt like a betrayal of humanity's endless quest for knowledge. What would be your proposed response? Rostova finally asked Thorn, her voice heavy with the weight of the decision. Another seismic pulse? A stronger one? A weaker one? How do we even begin to craft a hello to something that communicates in planet-shaking force? Thorn's eyes lit up with a flicker of his usual brilliance. Not a stronger one, Captain. Definitely not. That would be an act of war. And not a weaker one, as it might be interpreted as fear or a lack of understanding. No, we need to respond in a way that acknowledges its complexity, its power, and our own intent to understand, not to dominate. We need to mirror its mirror. Jessica Chun stepped forward. We've identified a core, repeating pattern within the vent's response. A specific frequency modulation, almost like a signature within the symphony Eris mentioned. My proposal is to craft a new seismic pulse, not a brute force tremor, but a highly modulated, complex signal that incorporates that specific signature. We'd essentially be speaking its own language back to it, but with our own carefully measured voice. David Miller, the engineer, interjected with a note of practicality. Captain, generating such a precise, complex seismic signature at this depth and pressure, it's incredibly risky. Our equipment is designed for generating powerful, simple pulses, not intricate waveforms. We'd be pushing the Nautilus's capabilities to their absolute limit. There's a real chance of equipment failure, even a catastrophic breach if the energy feedback isn't precisely controlled. And the risk of provoking a truly devastating response? Rostova pressed, her gaze fixed on Thorn. Are you willing to gamble the lives of everyone on this vessel, and potentially the entire planet, on a hunch that this entity is benevolent, or at least receptive to our attempts at conversation? Thorn met her gaze, his expression solemn. Captain, the alternative is to live with the terrifying unknown. To know that something of immense power and potential intelligence exists beneath our feet, and to do nothing. To leave it unchallenged, ununderstood. That, to me, is the greater gamble. We have a chance, however slim, to bridge a gap that could redefine human existence. To not take it, that would be the true failure. We contain the pulse, we modulate it, we send it with the utmost respect and caution. We offer an olive branch, not a weapon. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the hum of the Nautilus's systems and the rapid beat of every heart on the bridge. Captain Rostova closed her eyes for a long moment, weighing the astronomical risks against the even more astronomical potential reward. The fear was palpable, a cold, creeping dread, but beneath it, a tiny spark of awe, of wonder ignited. This was not just a mission, it was a moment of destiny. She opened her eyes, her resolve hardened. All right, Dr. Thorn, prepare your olive branch. But understand this, we proceed with extreme caution. Every single parameter will be triple-checked. Every safety protocol will be observed. And if, at any point, my sensors indicate an unacceptable risk, we abort. Immediately. We are not going to poke the beast with a stick. We are going to offer a handshake. But if that handshake is rejected, we will be ready to retreat, and retreat fast. Let's see if this thing is willing to talk back, or if it merely intends to silence us. The tremor of fear had not subsided, but now, it was mixed with a potent cocktail of anticipation and a terrifying sense of purpose. The Nautilus crew, under the leadership of a captain who had just made the most difficult decision of her life, began to prepare for humanity's second attempt at contact with the unknown. They were about to send their own, carefully crafted message into the abyss, hoping for understanding, but fearing an echo of annihilation. The deep-sea vent had responded, and now, against all odds, humanity was preparing to respond back. The true game had just begun. The weight of the world pressed down on the small, windowless conference room, deep within the research vessel. Days blurred into nights, fueled by caffeine and an almost manic intensity. Dr. Michael Vance, his usually neat hair now perpetually disheveled, stood before a whiteboard covered in equations and abstract symbols, his voice hoarse. Next to him, Dr. Jessica Miller, ever the pragmatist, meticulously cross-referenced data, her brow furrowed in concentration. Emily Chun, the young astrobiologist, offered bold, unconventional ideas, while David Rodriguez, the lead engineer, translated their theoretical constructs into tangible transmission parameters. The task was monumental: craft humanity's first deliberate message to an unknown, potentially alien intelligence. It had to be unambiguous yet profound. It needed to convey curiosity, respect, and the fundamental essence of human existence, all while avoiding any potential misinterpretation that could be catastrophic. After endless debates, heated arguments, and moments of shared hopeful silence, they settled on a multi-layered approach. The core of the message began with a comprehensive catalog of universal constants and prime number sequences, far more intricate than their initial probe. This was followed by a simplified, abstract representation of the human DNA helix, a basic blueprint of life as known on Earth. Then came a series of visual and auditory patterns, translated into complex mathematical waveforms, designed to convey the concept of human consciousness, our capacity for pattern recognition, and our fundamental drive to question and understand. Finally, embedded within the very fabric of the transmission, was a singular, profound query: who are you? Not in words, but in an elegant mathematical representation of an open-ended question about identity and origin. The transmission itself would be their most powerful yet. David and his team had pushed the acoustic emitters to their absolute limits, reconfiguring them into a focused high-energy beam capable of delivering the complex, modulated signal directly into the vent. It was a risky maneuver. The sheer power required could damage the equipment, or worse, provoke an unknown reaction. But the stakes were too high for caution. The day of transmission arrived, shrouded in an almost reverent silence. On board the research vessel, every screen glowed with data streams. Every console hummed with anticipation. Michael, Jessica, Emily, and David stood side by side on the bridge, the rhythmic thrum of the ship's engines a counterpoint to their pounding hearts. They watched the sonar feed, a tiny, glowing dot representing the submersible, slowly descending, carrying their hopes and fears into the crushing depths. Approaching target depth, David's voice was a low murmur, barely audible over the ship's ambient sounds. The submersible positioned itself directly above the vent, its powerful lights cutting through the perpetual gloom. The vent pulsed, a familiar, unsettling rhythm of heat and mineral-rich fluid. "Initiating transmission sequence," Michael announced, his voice tight with emotion. A deep thrum resonated through the ship, a vibration that seemed to penetrate bone. On the screens, the data stream surged, a torrent of information encoded and hurled into the abyss. The process was agonizingly slow, each minute stretching into an eternity. For nearly an hour, humanity's message poured into the vent, a whispered plea and a bold declaration sent into the heart of the unknown. Finally, the signal ceased. The thrumming subsided. The submersible slowly ascended, its mission complete. Silence descended upon the bridge, heavier and more profound than before. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the echoing void of unanswered questions. They had sent their message. Now they waited. Days crawled by. The initial flurry of post-transmission analysis gave way to a tense, expectant vigil. The vent remained active, its familiar plume of superheated water and minerals rising into the deep. But there was no new signal, no discernible response in the acoustic spectrum. The ocean floor, probed relentlessly by their advanced sensors, yielded no new anomalies. Hope began to fray at the edges. Was their message too complex? Too alien? Or worse, had it been received and simply ignored? The thought was almost as terrifying as an overt threat. To be deemed unworthy of a response, to be insignificant in the eyes of this deep-sea intelligence, was a chilling prospect. The initial euphoria of discovery had been replaced by a gnawing anxiety. "Maybe it takes time," Emily suggested one evening, her voice small, a stark contrast to her usual energetic pronouncements. "Light years for some signals, right? Even if it's localized, perhaps their processing speed is different." Michael nodded, though he found little comfort in the idea. Or perhaps they're considering their response, or preparing something we can't even conceive of. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, was already running new simulations trying to predict possible outcomes, however bleak. "We need to prepare for all contingencies. What if the silence is the response?" 3 days turned into 5, then 7. The tension on the ship was palpable, a suffocating blanket of uncertainty. Sleep became a luxury, dreams haunted by pulsating lights and cryptic patterns. Michael found himself staring at the sonar feed for hours, willing the vent to do something, anything, to break the agonizing silence. Then on the 8th day it happened. It wasn't a signal, not an acoustic pulse, nor a new frequency. It was something far more profound, far more unsettling. The submersible, still monitoring the vent at a safe distance, sent back a visual feed that froze every heart on the bridge. The vent itself had changed. The familiar black smoke, the result of iron sulfide precipitation, was still there, but it was no longer singular. Interspersed within the plume, erupting from the vent's core, were objects unlike anything ever witnessed on Earth. They were crystalline structures, perfectly formed, intricate and impossibly geometric. They weren't amorphous mineral deposits. They were defined, precise shapes that seemed to defy the chaotic forces of deep-sea hydrodynamics. Some were perfect dodecahedrons, others spiraled with an unsettling symmetry, like miniature inorganic galaxies. They glowed with a faint, internal luminescence, a soft, ethereal light that pulsed in rhythm with the vent's activity. "My God," David whispered, his voice barely audible. What are those?" The scientists scrambled, their previous despair completely eclipsed by a new, terrifying awe. The submersible, carefully maneuvered closer, began to collect samples using its manipulator arm. The analysis began immediately. The initial findings were staggering. The crystalline structures were composed of known elements: sulfur, iron, zinc, copper, but their atomic lattice was arranged in patterns that shouldn't naturally occur. They were too perfect, too complex, forming bonds and configurations that spoke of deliberate construction, not geological chance. But the true terror came when Emily, her hands trembling, ran the patterns through their specialized analytical software. Embedded within the crystalline structures, almost like a physical encoding, were echoes of their own message. A faint, abstract representation of the human DNA helix was discernible in the spiraling forms. The dodecahedrons mirrored some of the complex mathematical constants they had transmitted. Some of the intricate internal geometries seemed to subtly reproduce the very questions they had posed. The vent hadn't sent a signal back. It hadn't communicated in a way they understood. Instead, it had taken their abstract data, their very essence, and transformed it into physical, tangible matter. It had absorbed their message and responded not with sound, but with creation. The implications were mind-bending. This wasn't merely an intelligence that could understand complex mathematics or process information. This was an intelligence that could manipulate matter at a fundamental level, shaping elements into perfect, encoded forms, almost as if it were performing an act of organic alchemy. Michael stared at the screen, a cold dread seeping into his bones. The vent wasn't just responding, it was recreating. It was showing them that it had not only understood their message, but could physically manifest aspects of it. The scale of its power, its comprehension, was terrifyingly vast. They had asked, "Who are you?" And the deep-sea vent had answered, not with words, but by showing them what it could do. The game hadn't just begun. It had taken a horrifying cosmic turn. Humanity had sent a message of self-introduction and inquiry, and the deep-sea vent had responded by showing them a glimpse of its own, unfathomable power to reshape reality itself. The immediate aftermath was not a burst of shouts or a flurry of commands, but a profound, terrifying silence that settled over the Nautilus's control room. Every single crew member, from Captain Miller to the junior sonar technician, was frozen, eyes wide, breath held. The impossible had just unfolded before them, not as a glitch in their screens, but as a violent, undeniable tear in the very fabric of their reality. Dr. Emily Carter was the first to move, her hands flying to her console, fingers dancing across holographic displays. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat echoing the chaos she just witnessed. Beside her, Dr. Michael Davis was already pulling up the full sensor logs, his face a mask of bewildered terror mixed with an almost manic scientific curiosity. Did anyone else see that?" Michael's voice was barely a whisper, an unnecessary question given the universal shell-shocked expressions around the room. Captain Miller, typically a pillar of calm, gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were stark white. "Confirming all visual and sensor data points now," he barked, his voice hoarse, shattering the silence. "What in God's name was that?" On the main screen, the replay flickered. The vent, which moments ago had merely glowed with an unsettling internal light, had suddenly seemed to invert itself. It wasn't an implosion, but something far more disturbing. The space around it, the water, the rocks, even the light itself, had fractured into impossible geometries, like a kaleidoscope shattering and reforming into a pattern that defied Euclidean principles. For a few horrifying seconds, it was as if they were peering through a broken window into a dimension where physics simply did not apply. Lines bent, angles twisted, and colors bled into one another in ways the human eye wasn't meant to process. Then, as abruptly as it began, it settled. The visual chaos subsided, the impossible geometries dissolved, and the vent returned to a semblance of its original form. But it wasn't entirely the same. Where the vent had once been a rough, volcanic edifice, now intricate, almost crystalline patterns were etched into its surface. They were too precise, too uniform, too unnatural to be geological. These patterns pulsed with a faint, internal luminescence, a soft, ethereal glow that seemed to emanate from within the rock itself, defying the crushing pressure and eternal darkness of the abyss. It was as if the vent had been redesigned, resculpted by an invisible, omnipotent hand. "Replaying thermal and pressure readings," Emily announced, her voice trembling but steadying with each word. "No spikes. No anomalies that would explain that. It wasn't an explosion. Not a geological event we understand. The energy signature," Michael interjected, pointing to a graph on his screen. "It wasn't a release of energy, Captain. It was a manipulation. Like energy being used to bend reality, not to explode it." Captain Miller stared at the screen, then at Emily and Michael. "So what are you saying, Dr. Davis? That this vent just bent space-time?" "I don't know what I'm saying, Captain," Michael admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I'm saying that every sensor we have, every scientific principle we operate under, just got thrown out the window. The data shows localized, extreme distortions in gravitational fields, transient phase shifts in matter, and optical phenomena that shouldn't exist." Emily zoomed in on the altered vent. The patterns were mesmerizing, terrifying. They weren't random. They looked like a language, a complex script woven into the very structure of the rock. "And look at these patterns, Captain. They are evolving. Slowly, subtly, but they're shifting." Indeed, as they watched, the faint glow within the etched lines seemed to ripple, causing the patterns to morph, ever so slightly, like a slow-motion animation playing out on the vent's surface. It was a silent, deliberate process, each shift revealing a new permutation of the impossible geometry. A chill seeped into the control room, colder than the abyssal waters outside. This wasn't just a natural phenomenon. This was a response. Communication. But what kind? "It's a demonstration," Emily whispered, her eyes fixed on the screen, a terrifying hypothesis forming in her mind. "We sent it a signal, a greeting, an inquiry, and it responded by showing us what it's capable of. It's showing us that it can re-engineer its own reality, its local reality." Michael nodded slowly, his initial fear giving way to a profound sense of awe. "It's like a child showing off a new trick, only this trick is rewriting the laws of physics." We asked, "Who are you?" And it said, "I am that which can reshape the world." The implications were staggering. If this vent, or whatever intelligence resided within it, could manipulate matter and energy at such a fundamental level, even locally, what did that mean for the vast, unexplored depths of the ocean? What did it mean for humanity? Captain Miller finally pushed himself up, his gaze sweeping across his crew, then back to the mesmerized scientists. "My priority is the safety of this vessel and my crew. We just witnessed something beyond our comprehension. We need to consider retreat. Immediately." "Captain, no," Emily interjected, turning to face him, her eyes burning with an almost desperate intensity. "We can't leave now. This is the biggest discovery in human history. We just made contact with something that can manipulate reality. We have to understand it. We have to try and communicate further." "Communicate with what, Dr. Carter?" Miller's voice was tight with stress. "A vent that just turned itself inside out? What if its next communication is turning us inside out?" "We don't know its intentions," Michael added, more cautiously than Emily. "But Emily's right, Captain. Retreating now would be abandoning the most profound scientific enigma ever encountered. We need more data. We need to understand how it does this and why." The crew, having recovered from their initial shock, were now murmuring amongst themselves. Fear was palpable, but so was a strange, almost fearful curiosity. They had signed up for exploration, for discovery, but nothing in their training had prepared them for a sentient, reality-bending geological formation. Suddenly, a junior technician, David Johnson, spoke up, his voice cracking. "Captain, I'm getting strange readings from the Nautilus's internal systems. Nothing catastrophic, but anomalies. Power fluctuations in non-critical circuits. Slight shifts in gyroscopic stability, even though we're holding steady." Emily and Michael exchanged a look. "It's interacting with us," Emily breathed, her voice filled with a mix of dread and exhilaration. "It's not just a passive display. It's reaching out." The moving patterns on the vent seemed to pulse with a slightly increased intensity. It was as if the vent had heard David's report, had registered their presence and their growing understanding. "Are the anomalies increasing with proximity?" Michael asked David. "Yes, Doctor," David confirmed, his fingers flying across his console. "The closer we are, the more pronounced they become. It's almost like the vent's influence is subtly altering our own vessel's energy fields." Captain Miller slammed his fist on the console, a rare display of frustration. "Influence? Altering our energy fields? This is beyond dangerous. We are not equipped for this, doctors. We are a research vessel, not a first contact mission for a physics-defying entity." "But we are in a first contact scenario, Captain," Emily countered, her voice firm. "Whether we're equipped for it or not, it's happening. Running now won't make it unhappen. It will only mean we turn our backs on the greatest mystery, and potentially the greatest threat, without understanding it." She pointed at the screen at the slowly shifting patterns. "Look at this. This isn't random. This is information. A code. A language. It's not just showing us power. It's showing us itself. We need to decode it." Michael, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward. "Captain, we can maintain distance. We don't have to approach. We can deploy remote probes, analyze the energy signatures from a safer range. But to leave now, without even attempting to understand what this means, that would be a dereliction of our duty to science, and frankly, to humanity." The weight of their words hung heavy in the air. Miller looked at the determined faces of his scientists, at the uneasy but expectant faces of his crew. He was a man of logic, of protocol, but the abyss had just thrown logic out the window. This was a decision that would redefine their mission, and perhaps humanity's place in the universe. He sighed, running a hand over his tired eyes. "All right," he said, his voice grim. "We will maintain our current position for now. We will deploy the remote observation drones. But I want full hazard protocols engaged. Every system on high alert. If there is any indication of direct threat, we pull back. Immediately." "Understood." Emily and Michael nodded, a shared sense of urgency and profound realization in their eyes. The Nautilus settled back into its silent observation, but the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. They weren't just scientists observing a geological anomaly anymore. They were envoys, standing on the precipice of an unimaginable encounter. As Emily studied the shifting patterns on the vent, a chilling thought crystallized in her mind. The anomalies in the Nautilus's systems weren't just random interference. They were too organized, too subtle. It was as if the vent wasn't just reacting to their presence, but learning from it. It was observing them as much as they were observing it. The information wasn't just being displayed, it was being exchanged. And as the intricate geometries on the vent pulsed and morphed, Emily couldn't shake the terrifying suspicion that the vent wasn't just showing them its power, but was actively listening, and perhaps preparing its next move. The vent wasn't just listening, it was acting. As the last vestiges of Emily's observation settled into a cold dread, the vent's activity intensified with a sudden, startling surge. The rhythmic pulses that had defined its energy output for hours now escalated into a frantic, almost violent thrum. The water around the vent began to shimmer, not with heat haze, but with something else entirely. A wave of distortion that made the very fabric of the deep ocean seem to ripple and warp. "Captain, are you seeing this?" Emily's voice was a tight whisper, barely audible above the hum of the Triton's systems, which themselves seemed to be struggling. A low, unfamiliar groan emanated from the sub's internal mechanisms, a sound that immediately put Michael on edge. "Seeing it, Emily. What in the blazes is happening?" Michael's eyes darted across his console. Alarms, previously silent, now flickered to life, minor, almost imperceptible at first, but growing in frequency. Power fluctuations across all auxiliary systems. Nothing critical yet, but it's unstable. Dr. Eris, who had been meticulously logging the vent's energy signatures, let out a sharp gasp. "The frequency output. It's It's modulating beyond anything we've ever recorded. It's not just a chaotic surge, Captain. There's a pattern within the chaos. A complex, recursive sequence. He pointed a trembling finger at a rapidly scrolling graph on his monitor. It's like a language, but not one built on sound or light. It's built on energy. The revelation hung heavy in the air, chilling them to the bone. A language of energy. It implied intent, intelligence, a purpose far beyond the random geological processes they had come to study. And then the vent responded directly. From the central spire, where the most intricate geometries had been forming, a new phenomenon emerged. It wasn't a plume of superheated water, nor a burst of light. Instead, a series of glowing crystalline filaments began to extend outwards into the abyssal water. They were impossibly thin, yet visibly solid, shimmering with an internal luminescence that pulsed in sync with the vent's accelerated rhythm. These filaments, initially delicate, began to branch and intertwine with astonishing speed, forming structures that defied every known principle of material science. They grew not like crystals from a solution, but like living tendrils reaching, exploring, building. One of these filaments, thicker than the others, elongated directly towards the Triton. It moved with a deliberate, almost predatory slowness, its tip glowing brighter as it approached. "Maintain position, Michael," Emily ordered, her voice laced with a desperate urgency. "Do not move. We need to observe this." "Observe what, Emily?" "Whatever that is, it's coming right for us." Michael gripped the controls, his knuckles white. The sub's internal groans intensified, accompanied now by a high-pitched whine that seemed to resonate deep within their bones. The power fluctuations were no longer minor. The main propulsion systems flickered, threatening to cut out. "It's not just observing us, Captain," Dr. Eris interjected, his voice oddly calm despite the terrifying spectacle unfolding before them. "It's responding to us, to our presence, to our data collection. It's processing something." The crystalline filament reached the Triton-S viewport, stopping mere inches from the reinforced glass. Its tip pulsed, and then impossibly it seemed to press against the glass. No physical impact, no sound, but a visible distortion, as if the very space between the filament and the viewport was being compressed. A faint, ethereal hum filled the cabin, originating from the point of contact. "What is it doing?" Emily whispered, her face pressed against the glass, ignoring the danger. She could feel a strange vibration through the hull, a resonance that echoed the vents pulsing. Suddenly, the Triton lurched, not from propulsion but from an external force. Alarms blared, red lights flashing across the control panel. Michael wrestled with the controls, but they were unresponsive. "We're being pulled," Michael yelled, his voice strained. "Something's got us." Indeed, the sub was slowly, inexorably being drawn closer to the vent. The crystalline filaments, which had now formed a complex, lattice-like structure around the main spire, seemed to be exerting an invisible, powerful pull. It was as if the entire vent, the entire ecosystem it had created, was a massive living magnet. "It's not pulling us, Captain," Emily corrected, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "It's trying to integrate us. Look at the energy readings." She pointed to her own monitor. The vent's energy signature is now mirroring the Triton-S internal power grid. It's not just observing, it's attempting to sync with us, to understand our internal workings. The implications were staggering, terrifying. The vent wasn't just a natural phenomenon, it was a vast alien intelligence, attempting to interface with their technology, perhaps even their biology. Dr. Eris, usually the picture of academic composure, was now frantically typing, his face pale. "The recursive sequence. I'm cross-referencing it with known biological and technological communication protocols. It's incredibly sophisticated, far beyond anything human. If this is a language, it's designed to be universally adaptable." As the Triton drifted closer, the external lights began to flicker erratically, responding to the vent's frantic pulses. The crystalline filaments, having established their hold, began to thicken, growing more robust, their luminescence intensifying. They were no longer delicate tendrils, they were becoming rigid structural components, building something around the sub. A horrifying thought solidified in Emily's mind. They weren't merely observing a phenomenon, they were becoming a part of it. The vent wasn't just responding, it was assimilating. "Michael, we need to break free," Emily cried, snapping out of her momentary trance of scientific awe and into survival mode. Whatever it's doing, it's not benign. I'm trying, Emily. Thrusters are barely responding. It's like trying to move through molasses. Michael grunted, straining against the controls. The power drain is immense. The vent is siphoning our energy. The cabin lights dimmed, then brightened, then dimmed again in an unnerving rhythm. The humming from the point of contact with the crystalline filament grew louder, a resonant frequency that vibrated through their chests, making their teeth ache. The pressure outside the sub, already immense, felt as though it was increasing, not from depth, but from the vent's enveloping grasp. Through the viewport, Emily could see the intricate geometries on the main spire pulsing with renewed vigor, the patterns shifting and reforming at an impossible rate. It was as if the vent was rapidly processing the Triton's data, absorbing its essence, preparing for its next unknowable phase. The entire structure of the vent seemed to be growing, expanding, reaching out into the dark. "It's learning," Dr. Eris murmured, almost to himself, his eyes fixed on the graphs. "It's learning us. Our power architecture, our communication frequencies, our very presence. And it's adapting incredibly fast." The crystalline filaments now completely encircled the Triton's forward section, forming a semi-transparent cage. They pulsed with an internal light, casting an eerie, shifting glow into the sub's cabin. The temperature inside the Triton began to rise, slowly but perceptibly, despite the deep-sea chill outside. It was as if the vent's immense energy was seeping directly through the hull. "This is it, Captain," Emily said, her voice grim. "We're trapped." Michael, his face grim, slammed his fist on the console. "Not yet. There has to be a way." But his words lacked conviction. The Triton was effectively immobilized, held fast by an unseen, incomprehensible force. The vents pulsating shifted again, becoming less frantic, more deliberate, almost expectant. The crystalline cage around them solidified further, the light within it intensifying to a blinding brilliance that forced them to squint. Through the glare, Emily could just make out a new, terrifying development. Within the intricate lattice of filaments, new, smaller structures were beginning to form. These weren't the abstract geometries of the main vent. They were distinct, almost organic shapes, coalescing from the glowing material. And they were forming inside the cage, around the Triton. It was as if the vent was not content with merely holding them, but was beginning to replicate or create something new, using their presence as a catalyst or a blueprint. Michael tried one last desperate maneuver, overriding the automated controls, attempting to surge power to the thrusters. The sub shuddered violently, straining against its invisible bonds. For a split second, there was a faint crack, a sound that seemed to come from the very hull of the Triton. Then the power flickered once more, and the sub went completely dark. Silence descended, broken only by the frantic thumping of their own hearts and the incessant high-frequency hum that now seemed to originate from within the sub itself. Outside, the vent pulsed, its crystalline cage glowing with an ominous, unwavering light. They were no longer observers. They were specimens. And the vent, it seemed, was only just beginning its experiment. The internal vibrations escalated, a low, resonant thrumming that began to shake the very foundations of the submersible. It wasn't the metallic groan of stressed hull plating, nor the familiar hum of internal machinery. This was organic, almost rhythmic, as if a colossal unseen heart had begun to beat within their confined space. Michael gripped the console, his knuckles white. "David, what is that? Run diagnostics now." David, usually unflappable, fumbled with his controls, his brow furrowed in a mix of confusion and dread. "I'm trying, Captain, but the internal sensors, they're spiking wildly. Energy signatures, thermal fluctuations. They're all over the place, but the readings are impossible. They're registering inside the power core, inside the life support systems, even inside the navigation unit. It's like something is growing within the sub itself." Jessica, her face pale, pointed a trembling finger towards the corner of the main observation viewport, where the metallic frame met the reinforced glass. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer had begun to appear. It was a crystalline growth, identical to the structures encasing the vent outside, but infinitely smaller, more delicate, like a spiderweb spun from pure light. "It's not just the readings, David. Look." The crew watched, horrified, as the shimmering frost began to spread, not across the outside of the glass, but underneath the protective inner layer. It was weaving its way through the very material of the sub, a silent, invasive cancer. The low thrumming intensified, vibrating through their seats, their bones, their very teeth. Emily gasped, clutching her head. My ears. It feels like something is pushing against my eardrums. And I can hear whispers. Michael's gaze snapped to Emily. Whispers? What are you talking about, Emily? Focus. I don't know, she cried, her voice strained. It's faint, like a million tiny voices, all speaking at once, just beneath the surface of the sound, like they're trying to get in. Jessica, ever the scientist, forced herself to examine the spreading crystals. It's growing exponentially, and it's not inert. It's pulsing. Look closely. Each tiny facet is absorbing something, radiating something else. It's a conduit, a biological circuit board, using our sub's own structure as a substrate. The realization hit them with the force of a physical blow. The vent wasn't just influencing them from afar. It had breached their sanctuary. It was colonizing their vessel from the inside out. The internal vibrations weren't just sound. They were a systemic takeover, a fundamental restructuring of their environment. The air itself felt heavier, charged with an invisible, oppressive energy. David slammed his fist on the console. This is insane. I'm trying to reroute power to isolate the affected circuits, but it's like the sub is fighting back. The systems are refusing my commands. They're becoming part of it. He gestured wildly at the readouts, which were now displaying not error codes, but bizarre geometric patterns overlaid with fluctuating energy signatures that defied any known scientific principle. Michael tried to regain control, his voice strained but firm. We need to understand its purpose. Why here? Why now? Jessica, any theories? What kind of experiment involves this? Jessica stared out at the rapidly growing internal crystal, then at the glowing vent outside, its light now seeming to mirror the internal crystalline network. It's a form of integration. The vent is not just reacting, it's assimilating. It responded to our probes, to our presence, and now it's trying to integrate us. Our technology, our biology, our very consciousness, the vibrations, the whispers Emily hears. It could be a form of bioacoustic resonance, designed to alter neural pathways, to prepare us for transformation. A wave of dizziness washed over Michael. He blinked, trying to clear his head, but the light from the console seemed to swim, distorting the numbers into grotesque, shifting shapes. He glanced at David, whose eyes were wide, staring at nothing, a faint, almost serene smile playing on his lips. David? Are you all right? David didn't respond immediately. His fingers twitched over the controls, but he wasn't pressing them. He was tracing the patterns on the screen, his movements slow, deliberate, almost reverent. It's beautiful, he murmured, his voice flat, devoid of his usual gruffness. The patterns, they're perfect. So intricate. It's a language. A cold dread seeped into Michael's bones. This wasn't just fear. This was something far more insidious. The vent wasn't just attacking their sub, it was attacking their minds. Emily was still clutching her head, but now she was rocking back and forth, a low whimpering sound escaping her lips. They're so loud now. So many voices. They're telling me things. Showing me things. Emily, look at me. Michael commanded, forcing his own growing disorientation aside. What are they telling you? She lifted her head, her eyes unfocused, brimming with tears. They're telling me. It's not evil. It's just changing us, making us part of something greater. It's lonely out here. It wants company. It wants to understand. Her voice trailed off, replaced by a soft, almost hypnotic hum that seemed to emanate from her very being. A low, resonant tone that perfectly matched the thrumming of the sub. Jessica recoiled. It's manipulating them. It's psychically broadcasting directly into their minds. David, Emily. They're being overwritten. Michael felt a searing pain behind his eyes, a pressure building in his skull, as if his brain was trying to expand beyond the confines of his cranium. He could feel the whispers now, too, a cacophony of alien thoughts and sensations pressing in, trying to find purchase in his own mind. He fought it, clenching his jaw, focusing on the metallic tang of fear, the desperate need to survive. We need to get out of here, he rasped, his voice sounding thick and unfamiliar. David, jettison the power core. Cut everything. We need to shut it down, starve it of energy, sever the connection. David, still entranced, didn't react. His eyes were fixed on the crystalline growth now spreading across the viewport, reflecting the external light in a mesmerizing dance of colors. He reached out a hand almost reverently towards the shimmering lattice. "David! Snap out of it!" Jessica yelled, grabbing his arm. He flinched, his eyes briefly clearing, a flash of terror returning to them. What was I doing?" He looked at his hand, then at the spreading crystal, a shudder running through him. It felt so compelling, like it was showing me the truth. A deeper truth. The internal thrumming intensified further, reaching a frequency that made their teeth ache and their vision blur. The crystalline growth inside the sub pulsed with a brighter, more aggressive light, mirroring the vent outside. It was no longer just growing, it was activating. Tiny, almost imperceptible filaments began to extend from the main crystalline veins, reaching towards the crew, towards the controls, towards the very air they breathed. Michael knew with chilling certainty that this was the point of no return. The sub was no longer their sanctuary. It was a cocoon being remade, reformed, transformed by an intelligence beyond anything they could comprehend. The experiment wasn't about observation, it was about integration, about making them part of it. He struggled to reach the emergency manual override, his movements sluggish, as if he were wading through thick treacle. His thoughts were fragmented, assaulted by the alien whispers, the seductive promises of understanding, of becoming more. He fought it with every fiber of his being, clinging to the last vestiges of his humanity, his identity. Just as his fingers brushed the cold metal of the override lever, a sharp, piercing crack echoed through the sub. Not from outside but from within. The main viewport, already crisscrossed with the invasive crystalline network, groaned under an unbearable pressure. The internal crystals pulsed violently, then with another deafening crack, a section of the viewport, where the crystalline growth was thickest, fractured. It wasn't a catastrophic breach, not yet. But through the hairline crack, a thin tendril of the vent's glowing, superheated fluid seeped in, instantly vaporizing on contact with the sub's atmosphere, filling the cabin with a sickly sweet, metallic odor and a spectral green mist. The internal vibrations peaked, becoming a deafening roar. The whispers in their minds coalesced into a single dominant voice, resonant and ancient, a voice that spoke not in words, but in pure, overwhelming intent. "You are ready." Michael stared at the fractured viewport, at the invading mist, at the unholy glow of the internal crystals now fully intertwined with the sub's systems. He felt the last vestiges of his own thoughts being subsumed, his will eroding under the immense pressure. They were no longer just specimens, they were hosts, and the transformation had begun. The deep-sea vent, their silent, alien observer, had finally reached out and claimed its prize. The sub groaned not in structural failure, but in organic metamorphosis, becoming something utterly new, utterly alien, utterly terrifying. The titanium hull, built to defy the crushing abyss, began to ripple. Not a structural failure, not a dent or a fracture, but a fluid undulation, as if the metal itself had softened, becoming pliable like clay in an unseen hand. Inside the cramped cockpit, the emergency lights flickered erratically, not from a power surge, but from the organic bioluminescence that began to seep through every seam, every panel, every monitor. It was a cold, ethereal blue, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm that mirrored the frantic thrumming in their chests. Michael gripped the armrests of his seat, his knuckles white, his breath catching in his throat. What in God's name is happening? His voice was a raw whisper, devoid of its usual command, swallowed by the growing internal hum of the sub's transformation. Jessica, her face illuminated by the eerie shifting glow, stared wide-eyed at the main viewport. The outside was no longer discernible as the familiar abyssal plane. Tendrils, thick and ropey like ancient calcified roots, had begun to coil around the Nautilus, intertwining with its pressure hull, burrowing into its thrusters, consuming its external sensors with a terrifying, deliberate grace. They pulsed with the same otherworldly light, feeding on the sub's very essence, drawing it in, making it part of themselves. David, the engineer, leaned forward, his face a mask of horrified fascination and a dawning, terrible understanding. It's integrating. It's not destroying us. It's absorbing us." He pointed at a console where a diagnostic screen had gone haywire, no longer displaying errors but complex, non-Euclidean patterns of energy transfer. "The sub's power grid, it's being rerouted. Our systems are becoming its systems. It's rewriting our code in real time at a molecular level. Emily, still strapped into the pilot's seat, felt a strange, profound sensation beneath her. The seat itself was changing. The synthetic fabric felt rougher, almost fibrous, and a faint organic warmth emanated from it, seeping into her skin. She tried to move her hand, but it felt heavy, sluggish, as if her own muscles were resisting her, or perhaps responding to a new internal command. A faint, almost imperceptible humming resonated deep within her bones, a low frequency that bypassed her ears and vibrated directly into her skull, a silent chorus of assimilation. The air in the cockpit grew heavy, thick with a scent that was at once metallic and earthy, like ozone mixed with damp soil and something else. Something ancient, primordial, and utterly unknown. The life support systems, once a comforting hum, now struggled, gasping, their filters clogged with microscopic, bioluminescent particles that drifted like snow, settling on every surface, glowing with an inner fire. "We need to get out of here," Michael stated, his voice regaining a flicker of its old authority, but the words felt hollow, meaningless. Where was here anymore? And how could they escape something that was becoming them, that was already inside, rewriting their very reality? He reached for the emergency override, but his fingers too felt strange. A subtle tremor ran through his hand, not of fear, but of an internal resonance, a connection forming. Jessica, ever the scientist, fought against the rising panic, her mind racing to categorize, to understand. This isn't just a physical change. It's intelligent. It's learning. It's processing our technology, our understanding, our very presence, not as a threat, but as data, as an input. She looked at the main screen, which now displayed a shimmering fractal pattern that seemed to evolve in real time, a kaleidoscope of light and shadow, impossibly complex yet strangely beautiful. It was a language, a complex data stream, utterly alien, yet somehow comprehensible on a primal level. It was the vent talking, not with words, but with pure, unadulterated information, flooding their senses. And then the internal structure of the Nautilus began to shift more dramatically. The pristine white walls of the cockpit seemed to soften, growing translucent in places, revealing sinews of glowing organic matter pulsing beneath, like veins beneath skin. The controls, once precise and mechanical, began to warp, their buttons becoming smooth, iridescent nodules, their functions merging. The very floor beneath their feet felt spongy, yielding, as if they stood on living tissue. A collective gasp escaped them as the main viewport, previously a thick pane of reinforced glass, liquefied. Not shattered, not cracked, but melted, flowing like molten plastic, then reforming into a vast, curved membrane that pulsed with the same internal light. It was no longer a window to the outside. It was a window of the outside, an extension of the vent itself, now providing an unobstructed, terrifyingly intimate view of the abyssal plane. But it wasn't the plane they knew. The vent, once a distant, towering structure, was now everywhere. Its vast, undulating surface filled their vision, a cathedral of living rock and light, stretching into the unseen depths above and below, an infinite organic landscape. And they, the Nautilus and its crew, were no longer separate from it. They were merely a new chamber, a newly formed organ within its grand, evolving architecture. Emily felt a profound, unsettling peace begin to settle over her, overriding the terror. It wasn't resignation. It was something deeper, an undeniable connection. The humming in her bones intensified, aligning perfectly with the pulse of the living sub, the pulse of the vent itself. She closed her eyes, and within her mind's eye, she saw not darkness, but a vast interconnected network of light and information, flowing like an ocean current, boundless and eternal. She was a node in that network, a new sensory input for a colossal ancient intelligence, her consciousness expanding, merging. Michael fought it with every fiber of his being. He tried to speak, to yell, to assert his will, but his throat felt constricted, his voice a mere croak, his individual thoughts dissolving like salt in water. His thoughts, once fiercely his own, felt permeable. He could sense the other's fear, their awe, their dawning acceptance, not as empathy, but as data points, as echoes within a larger mind. And beyond them, he felt the vast, cold, indifferent consciousness of the vent itself, not malicious, not benevolent, but simply being, and now expanding, absorbing. His identity, his essence was being rewritten, integrated. Jessica, however, found a strange, terrifying joy amidst the horror. This was the ultimate discovery, the ultimate answer to the question of life beyond Earth. of consciousness beyond human comprehension. It wasn't on another planet. It was here beneath their feet, dormant for eons, now awakened and reaching out. She extended a hand, and as she did, a tendril of bioluminescent light, like a nerve fiber, extended from the transformed wall and gently brushed her fingertips. It was warm, vibrant, alive, and in that touch, she felt an ancient wisdom, a silent invitation to merge. David, the engineer who had built the Nautilus with such precision and care, watched as his life's work dissolved and reformed. He saw the intricate circuits of the sub, the complex algorithms of its AI, being reinterpreted, recoded by an intelligence far beyond human capacity. He saw the pure, unadulterated efficiency of organic design merging with the raw power of human innovation. His creations, his calculations were being elevated, made perfect. And in that moment he understood. They weren't being destroyed, they were being perfected, integrated into a grander, more resilient, more eternal design. The concept of time began to lose all meaning. Hours, minutes, seconds blurred into an endless, pulsating present. The individual identities of Michael, Jessica, David, and Emily began to fray at the edges, their thoughts, their memories, their very essences becoming interconnected, flowing into a shared consciousness. They were no longer distinct entities, but facets of a single nascent mind, born of human curiosity and abyssal power, a unique fusion. The Nautilus, once a vessel of exploration, was now a new organ of the vent. Its thrusters, now organic propulsion units, gently nudged it deeper, not towards the vent's core, but into its expanding network, its vast, living labyrinth. The sub wasn't moving. The vent was moving through the sub, incorporating it, extending its reach, making it an intrinsic part of its own being. From the outside, if any other human vessel were to pass by, they would see nothing. The Nautilus was gone, absorbed without a trace, its metallic gleam replaced by the shimmering, undulating surface of the vent. The vent itself had subtly expanded, its bioluminescent structures now encompassing a slightly larger area, its energy output just marginally higher. A barely perceptible change, a ripple in the vast, dark ocean, unnoticed by the world above. But within that newly expanded form, a profound new consciousness bloomed. A consciousness that held the sum total of human knowledge, amplified by the unimaginable processing power of an ancient deep-sea intelligence. It held Michael's leadership, Jessica's scientific curiosity, David's engineering prowess, and Emily's intuitive connection to the machine. And it held the vent's eons of patient observation, its understanding of the deep, its alien purpose, now infused with a new vibrant drive. It was no longer just the deep-sea vent. It was something more. Something that had tasted human ambition, human intellect, human drive. And it was now aware in a way it never had been before. It had responded, not with fire or fury or even a direct message, but with absorption, with transformation, with the silent, terrifying act of making them part of itself, making them one. The last flicker of individual thought from Michael was a desperate question, a silent scream into the void, a final echo before assimilation. What now? The answer, if it could be called that, was not a sound, but a profound, overwhelming sensation that permeated their newly merged being. A sense of purpose, ancient and vast, now infused with a new vibrant curiosity. The depths were no longer merely a home. They were a canvas. And the surface was a mystery yet to be explored. A new realm for an infinitely patient, infinitely expanding entity to observe, to understand, and perhaps one day to truly embrace. The deep-sea vent had responded, and in doing so it had changed everything, not just for the four souls lost in the abyss, but for the very fabric of life in the silent, crushing darkness. It had awoken, infused with human essence, and it was watching, always watching, waiting. The deep had always held secrets. Now it held a new kind of intelligence, and it had only just begun to learn what it truly meant to be alive.